I never thought working at the front desk of one of the most iconic hotels in New York City would teach me more about human nature than anything else in my life. But after 6 years at the Harrington Grand, a boutique luxury property tucked just off Fifth Avenue, 3 blocks from Central Park, I had seen every flavor of entitled guest imaginable. I had managed screaming executives who thought threatening a one-star review was the equivalent of pulling a fire alarm. I had navigated the delicate politics of celebrities who wanted their presence kept secret while simultaneously expecting everyone to recognize them. I had smiled through complaints about thread counts, pillow firmness, and the audacity of Manhattan traffic noise. I thought I had seen it all. I had not seen Deborah Whitfield. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon in late October, which is peak season in the city. The leaves in Central Park had turned that deep amber and gold that makes tourists weep with gratitude, and every room in our hotel was occupied. We had a waiting list for cancellations. Our staff was stretched thin but performing beautifully, the way a well-rehearsed orchestra does even when the concert hall is standing room only. I was working the afternoon shift, standing behind the marble front desk in my navy blazer with the gold Harrington crest on the lapel, when the revolving door pushed open and in she walked. She was somewhere in her mid-50s, dressed in a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her blonde hair, clearly maintained at significant expense, swept up in a way that communicated she had people for that. She had the kind of posture that comes not from good habits but from a lifelong belief that the world is required to look at you. Behind her, a porter struggled with 4 matching pieces of luggage in a shade of champagne that coordinated with her coat. She did not look at him once. She approached the desk without waiting, cutting directly in front of a kind older gentleman who had been patiently standing there for about 2 minutes. He made a small sound of protest. She did not acknowledge it. "I'm Deborah Whitfield," she said to me, as though that explained everything. She placed one manicured hand flat on the marble counter. "I have a reservation." I smiled the way I had trained myself to smile. Warm, professional, completely unreadable. "Welcome to the Harrington Grand, Mrs. Whitfield. Let me pull that up for you." I typed her name into the system and found her reservation immediately. A standard Superior King room on the 8th floor, booked 3 weeks prior through a third-party travel site at a discounted rate. 2 nights. Nothing flagged, nothing special. "It'll need to be moved to a suite," she said before I could even begin the check-in process. It was not a request. It was the tone of someone ordering a coffee. "I completely understand the appeal," I said smoothly. "Unfortunately, we are fully booked this evening, including all of our suite categories. I'm not able to. I'm sure you can make something work." She tilted her head slightly, as though she were doing me a favor by being patient. "I stay in suites. It's just what I do." I kept my expression perfectly neutral. "I wish I had availability to offer you, Mrs. Whitfield. Your room is a lovely Superior King on a high floor with a partial park view. It is a genuinely beautiful room." "A partial view," she said it the way someone might say they had found a cockroach in their soup. "I specifically require a full park view and a separate sitting room. And I have my dog." I glanced back at her reservation. No pet notation. No suite request. No special accommodation of any kind beyond the standard booking terms. "I don't see a pet noted on your reservation," I said carefully. "Our pet-friendly rooms are designated in advance, and Winston goes where I go." She gestured vaguely behind her, and I noticed for the first time that one of the champagne-colored bags was actually a soft-sided pet carrier, from which a small and deeply unimpressed-looking Pomeranian was staring at the world. "He's very well behaved." Winston chose this exact moment to begin barking at the porter, who had set down the luggage and was standing very still in the way of someone trying not to exist. "He's adjusting," Deborah said serenely. I excused myself briefly, stepped to the back office, and pulled up our pet policy, our availability grid, and the contact number for my manager, Renata, who was in a vendor meeting upstairs. I texted her a quick summary. Then I went back out, because the desk doesn't run itself and the gentleman Deborah had cut in front of was still waiting, now with the weary patience of a saint. I checked him in first, which I could tell annoyed Deborah immensely. I did it anyway because he had been waiting because it was the right thing to do, and because I have always believed that courtesy should be rewarded and rudeness should not be given extra oxygen. He thanked me genuinely and headed to the elevator. Deborah watched this with her jaw set in a way that suggested she was recalibrating her opinion of me and not in a flattering direction. "Now," I said, returning my full attention to her, "I want to be completely transparent with you. We do have one pet-tolerant room available. It's a deluxe queen on the 6th floor, which is slightly smaller than the room you originally booked, and there is a nightly pet fee of $75. Alternatively, your original reservation stands as booked. We cannot accommodate Winston in a non-designated room, and we have no suites available at any price point tonight. I'm sorry I can't offer more options." She stared at me. "Do you know who I am?" I had been waiting for this. In 6 years, I had heard some variation of it dozens of times, and the answer was almost always the same: someone who believes their identity should function as a passkey. "I know you're our guest, Mrs. Whitfield, and I genuinely want your stay to be wonderful. These are simply the options I have available. I want to speak to your manager." Of course. I reached for my phone, sent Renata a heads up, and within 4 minutes my manager came through the door from the back corridor. Renata was a tall Haitian-American woman in her 40s who had managed luxury properties in Miami, Chicago, and now New York. She had a spine made of something stronger than steel, and she had mentored me more in 3 years than anyone else in my career. She listened to Deborah's entire recitation: the suite requirement, the park view, Winston, the general inadequacy of the situation, with her hands clasped and her expression one of sincere and practiced attention. Then she said, very pleasantly, exactly what I had said. "No suites available. Pet policy required designated rooms." Deborah's original reservation remained valid. Deborah's voice climbed a register. She mentioned a friend who was a member of the city's hospitality board, which is not actually a real thing that has any bearing on hotel operations, but people say it. She mentioned that she had contacts at a prominent travel publication. Again, a common threat, and one that landed with less force than people imagined, because legitimate travel journalists don't check in under their own names announcing their credentials as leverage. She said the word unacceptable 4 times. Winston barked twice more. Renata did not move a millimeter. "I understand your frustration. These are the options we have." Deborah ultimately took her original room. She did not take the pet-friendly room, which meant Winston was technically not supposed to be in the hotel at all, but she had paid for her original reservation, and we could not refuse her entry. She checked in with the energy of someone who had not won but had not yet decided to stop fighting, which, in my experience, is the most exhausting kind of guest. Over the next 2 days, she called the front desk 11 times. I know because I counted. She called to complain about the ice machine noise, which was not audible from her room, as I confirmed with our facilities manager. She called to ask why her turn-down service had not included a specific brand of mineral water that we did not stock and that was not listed anywhere in our amenities. She called to report that Winston had not received a welcome amenity, which, again, was not something we offered and was not something she had been promised. She called to ask that the guests in the adjoining room be moved because she could hear their television, and when we investigated, our facilities team determined the sound levels were completely within normal range. Each time, whoever was on the desk handled it with grace. I had briefed the whole team during the shift handoff that first night. They knew. They were professional and patient and said the same thing every time. "We're sorry for any inconvenience. Here is what we can do. Here is what we cannot." On the second day, Friday, something happened that I had not expected. I was taking a late lunch break in the small staff lounge off the kitchen corridor when our housekeeping supervisor, a woman named Graciela, who had been with the Harrington for 11 years, found me. Graciela was not a person who agitated easily. She ran her department with the kind of quiet authority that meant problems got solved before they became visible. So when she came in looking the way she looked, I sat up straight. "Room 812, she said. "You should know." She told me that her housekeeper, a young woman named Priya, who was in her first year with us, had gone in to do the afternoon turn-down and found the room in a state that Graciela described, with professional restraint, as inconsistent with normal guest use. Pet waste on the carpet in 2 places. Furniture moved in a way that suggested Winston had been using certain items as a personal obstacle course. One of the decorative throw pillows from the bed, a Harrington monogrammed pillow, part of the room's inventory, was missing. And Priya had been spoken to by Mrs. Whitfield in a manner that Graciela described as demeaning and inappropriate. I set down my lunch. I want to explain something about how I think because it matters for what happened next. I am not a reactive person by nature. I have trained myself out of it. When I am angry, and I was sitting there listening to Graciela describe what had been said to Priya, I go quiet and organized. I make a list in my head. I start with what I can document, and I work from there. I asked Graciela to write up everything Priya had experienced and observed, with as much specific detail as possible, and to have it ready within the hour. I asked her to have our facilities team photograph the room damage before anything was cleaned or repaired. I texted Renata a brief summary and told her I needed 10 minutes before the end of my shift. Then I finished my lunch because I was hungry and because I have learned that better decisions are made on a full stomach. Renata and I met in her office at 4:30. I had the housekeeping report, the facilities photos, and a printout of our pet policy acknowledgement, which guests were required to agree to at booking and at check-in. Mrs. Whitfield had not flagged a pet at booking, had not been assigned a pet-designated room, and therefore had never signed the pet acknowledgement. She had, however, been verbally informed of the pet policy at check-in by me, which I had noted in the reservation file at the time, a habit Renata had drilled into me years earlier. Document everything, she always said. Your memory is yours. The file is the hotel's. We reviewed the photos. The carpet damage in 2 locations would require professional cleaning and likely a section replacement, depending on what the cleaning assessment found. The moved furniture had left drag marks on the hardwood near the window. The missing pillow, retail replacement value of $240 for that specific item, was not visible anywhere in the photos, which meant it had either been packed or discarded. Here is what I want to do, I said, and I laid it out for Renata. She listened, tapped her pen twice on her desk, and said, "Do it." Mrs. Whitfield was scheduled to check out at 11 on Saturday morning. At 10:55, I was at the front desk. Renata was nearby in the office, door open. At 11:02, Deborah Whitfield came off the elevator with Winston tucked under one arm, her champagne luggage being handled by a porter who, I noticed, she still had not acknowledged as a human being. She set her key card on the counter with the air of someone bestowing a gift. "I'll need a receipt emailed." "Absolutely," I said. "Before I process your checkout, I do need to go over a few additional charges on your account." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite alarm, more like the first recognition that the terrain had changed. "What charges?" "I booked a fixed rate." "Your room rate is exactly as booked," I said. "However, there are some additional items. The first is a deep cleaning fee for pet waste damage to the carpet in room 812. That comes to $215, which reflects our standard rate for that service." I watched her open her mouth, and I kept going because I had done this before, and the key is momentum. The second is a damage assessment fee for the hardwood floor abrasion near the window, which is $80 pending the full facilities review. That amount may be added just based on the final assessment, and we will notify you either way. The third is a replacement charge for one Harrington monogrammed throw pillow, which was inventoried in your room at check-in and is not present at checkout. That replacement cost is $240. Her face had moved through several phases in the time it took me to say all of that. It had gone from dismissive to sharp to something I could only describe as calculating. "That's absurd," she said. "I'm not paying for any of that." Winston was barely in that room. "I understand you may feel that way," I said. "I do want to be transparent with you. We have photographic documentation of the carpet damage and the floor abrasion, both time-stamped from this morning before housekeeping cleaned. And the pillow was confirmed in the room inventory conducted during check-in, which is standard procedure for all rooms, and is confirmed absent at checkout. These are not discretionary charges. I want to speak to your manager." Renata appeared from the office doorway. She had a gift for timing. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield. I'm the general manager. I understand you have some questions about your checkout charges." What followed was about 8 minutes of Deborah Whitfield explaining why none of this was her responsibility. Winston had barely touched the carpet. The furniture had already been like that. The pillow must have been removed by housekeeping. Renata listened to all of it with that same expression she always wore, open, attentive, and made of something Deborah could not get purchase on. Then Renata confirmed each charge, explained the documentation behind each one, and offered to provide copies of all photographs and the housekeeping report for Mrs. Whitfield's records. "You're going to be hearing from my attorney," Deborah said. "You're welcome to reach out to our legal department at any time," Renata said, and handed her a business card for the Harringtons' guest relations and legal contact. "We maintain full documentation on all disputes, and I'm going to be writing about this experience. I have a significant social media following. We welcome honest feedback from our guests," Renata said, and she meant it because honest feedback is a different animal entirely from a shakedown, and Renata knew that better than anyone. Deborah Whitfield paid the charges. She did it the way someone does when they know they're caught but cannot admit it, with a credit card slapped on the counter and a series of muttered comments that I made a point of not responding to. The receipt was processed. The luggage was loaded into a car that appeared at the curb. Winston regarded the street with an expression I found oddly sympathetic. "I thought that was the end of it." It was not quite the end. About 3 weeks later, Renata forwarded me an email she had received. It was from someone named Thomas Whitfield, who described himself as Deborah Whitfield's son. He was writing, he said, to apologize. He had learned about the circumstances of his mother's stay from the documentation that had been sent in response to her dispute of the charges. Apparently, she had, briefly, pursued the dispute with her credit card company, which had requested the hotel's documentation, and we had provided it in full. The photographs, the housekeeping report, the check-in notes, the pet policy records. All of it. Thomas said he had seen the documentation and was embarrassed. He said his mother had a pattern of behavior that the family had struggled with for years and that he was sorry for how she had treated the staff. He mentioned Priya by name. Renata had included the housekeeping incident in the documentation because it was material to the dispute and said it was unacceptable and that he was sorry. He asked if there was a way to send something to the staff as an acknowledgement. Renata wrote back a gracious, measured reply. She thanked him, confirmed that the staff were valued and supported, and mentioned that the Harrington had a staff appreciation fund that accepted contributions if he wished. He sent a check. We split it among the front desk and housekeeping teams for that week's shift. Priya used her portion toward a textbook for a hospitality management course she was taking. She told me about it one morning before the shift started, standing at the staff locker area with her blazer half-buttoned, and she laughed when she said it, and I did too because there was something so perfectly right about the shape of it. The entitled guest had stormed out promising consequences. The consequence that arrived 3 weeks later was a check made out to the people she had looked through. That is the thing about working the front desk of a place like the Harrington. You see everything. The full spectrum of what people are when they believe they have power over you, and what they reveal when they discover they do not. The guests who treat you like furniture are showing you something real about themselves, something they probably show everyone in their lives who they believe to be beneath them. And the guests who say thank you, who look the porter in the eye, who ask your name and use it, they're showing you something real too. Something worth holding on to. I stayed at the Harrington for 4 more years after that October. I eventually moved into an assistant general manager role, which meant I was the one in the back office when the front desk texted a warning about a difficult arrival. I trained a lot of front desk staff over those years, and there was one thing I always told them in the first week. Document everything I said. Be unfailingly polite. And understand that when someone demands special treatment, what they're usually asking for is permission to treat you badly, without consequence. Your job is not to give them that permission. Your job is to be so thoroughly professional, so meticulously documented, so completely unshakable, that when the reckoning comes, and it always comes, you are ready. Deborah Whitfield taught me that. She would hate knowing it. Winston, I like to think, would not have cared either way.